会ビッグマムとジンベエ
Your host, Dr. Anthony Chaffee, and today I have a very special guest, Professor Stephanie Seneff from MIT, who's joining us over from Hawaii. Professor Seneff, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. And just want to correct you, Dr. Seneff, I'm not a professor, I'm a research scientist, senior research scientist at MIT.
Oh, sorry. Well, Dr. Seneff.
Right, ow! 1, 2, ha! Super! Hill!
When we talk about deuterium getting out of balance, what sort of diseases can we expect to see? And specifically, you've studied cancer as well. How is this playing a role?
Yeah, I can talk about cancer. It's so fascinating. I'm trying to work it out, as we speak, but it's looking very, very intriguing to me. And I've been, writing papers and trying to figure out how to get them published. It's a rather radical idea around cancer, but it makes a lot of sense to me. Basically, as you probably know, there's this Warburg effect, where the cancer cells shut down the mitochondria. They have mitochondria. Sometimes they don't look like they're broken, but the cancer cell chooses not to use them to make ATP, or they make as little as possible. They kind of greatly reduce the use of their mitochondria to make ATP. And instead they make they process massive amounts of glucose through glycolysis, which is this anaerobic activity that happens in the cytoplasm, not in the mitochondria. And then it produces pyruvate, and then they turn it into lactate, the cancer cells. They turn the pyruvate into lactate and they ship it out. So they're dumping lots of lactate into the blood. It's a characteristic feature of cancer cells. And the interesting thing is that lactate actually carries a deuterium depleted proton that came from NADH, that came from this pathway in the glycolysis. So there's a precious proton sitting on NADH that it hands over to the lactate molecule and sends it out the door. So the cancer cell is actually delivering a deuterium depleted nutrient to the host that any of the organs in the body can take it up and happy to have it. So in other words, in a way, the cancer is providing the host, the whole organism, with food that's healthy food because it's low in deuterium. Yeah, so that's quite interesting, right? And then the other thing is cancer cells actually they have these VAGPase pumps, not to be confused with the AGPase that makes the ATP. They actually use up ATP. They work in the reverse, and they actually pump protons out of the cell. Well, in the case of cancer cells, normally those pumps hang out around the endosome lysosomes. The lysosomes are really acid, organelles where they digest things. They break down broken molecules and recycle them in the lysosomes. And the lysosomes need to be very acidic. They have to have a lot of protons to be acidic. And so these other ATPase pumps that are outside of the mitochondria pump protons into those lysosomes to make them acidic. But in the cancer cells, they take those same enzymes and they put them on the outside of the cell. They put them at the cell membrane, and they pump protons out into the external space. So cancer cells, it's very weird. They move them to a different place and they pump protons out of the cell. So they make the cell more basic by doing that because they're losing protons. And then they're making the outside environment more acidic. So they're changing the relationship between the outside and the inside as far as the pH is concerned. This is chemistry again. I guess it's probably a little over people's heads, but but anyway, those protons that they pump out are low in deuterium because those VAGPase pumps know how to avoid deuterium. There's all these enzymes that are specialized in, they're designed to protect from moving deuterons instead of protons. They know how to select for protons and preferentially pump out protons instead of deuterons, leaving behind in the cytoplasm increased deuterium in the cytoplasm of the cancer cell. So the cancer cell is enriching deuterium in its interior space and decreasing deuterium outside the cell by pumping out these protons. And again, it's basically like the cancer cells trying to hoard deuterium, and it knows that if it puts too much deuterium in its mitochondria, they're going to be bad news. They're going to spew out all these reactive oxygen, so they turn down the game, right? They use them as little as possible because they're not working well because there's too much deuterium. But they're kind of like, I think they're kind of being self-sacrificial. Like, okay, we know this host is in trouble because there's this really big problem with deuterium. So I'm going to, a cancer cell, I'm going to duplicate myself, make more of me, and all of us are going to help to pump out all this lactate and all these deuterium depleted protons to supply to the host. This is what the bacteria do too. You know, the yeast cells. The yeast cells are actually able to live in an environment that's extremely high in deuterium. It's amazing. Like our cells would just totally keel over and die if there was that much deuterium, but the yeast cells can really handle very high deuterium. And when they have they have ATPase pumps too. I mean, they have the regular, phosphor. They have the same mechanisms that we do. They can either do glycolysis to make ATP, or they can use. I think, they even have mitochondria. They basically have mitochondria in the yeast that can make ATP the same way we do. But when there's a lot of deuterium, they turn them off, just like we do. And when there's a lot of deuterium, they make ethanol, which is alcohol, right? Mm-hmm. They make lots of ethanol and they pump it out. And in fact, you can get drunk on ethanol produced by your yeast without ever drinking a drop of alcohol. That you can get very high levels of ethanol in your blood from the yeast. And the ethanol is just like the lactate. It's a different molecule, but it's the same concept, that they've taken that H off of the NADH, they've stuck it onto the ethanol, they ship it out the door. So they're providing the host with a deuterium depleted nutrient, which is alcohol. And they're getting enriched in deuterium all the while, because they're letting deuterium leave the body, leave their own body. So I think there's a whole, there's a bigger story there. I think there's just maybe even whenever you have disease, it's related to some organism trying to help you solve the deuterium problem. This is too bold a statement probably to make, but I'm sensing that might be the case, And so, and there's other aspects of the cancer cells that look to me like this concept of trying to help the body have as little deuterium as possible through self-sacrifice as a way to help the body to overcome the deuterium problem systemically. Yeah. By the activity of this cell that's causing trouble by growing into a big cancer mass, Yeah. It's kind of it's separated itself from the body. It's sort of become an external thing that's trying to solve the problem. That's what I'm thinking. It's a really radical concept, and you can see that it might be a little difficult to get something like that published, but.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting, though. I mean, you think about it, your body has these different ways of dealing with issues and dealing with problems, and that can be a problem in and of itself, or maybe it's holding you back from something worse. It's very interesting, and I mean, even just going through those pathways, like you said, the bacteria go through and they sequester deuterium and live in that way, or are cells reverting back to those mechanisms, for some, right. And why is that? Is it a protective manner, or is it something's just gone terribly wrong that's made it revert to that? But it's very interesting. It's very interesting that it's secreting out low deuterium substrate as well. Yes. Is that then a target for cancer treatment? Does it somehow modulate the amount of deuterium in the body?
Yes. Well, there's Somalyai, Somlyai. You know about him?
Yes,
Professor Somalyai. He's I don't know how to pronounce his name. I always struggle with it. Someone should tell me how to pronounce it so I can get it right. But he's written 2 books on deuterium depleted water as a treatment for cancer. And it's really interesting, actually, because when you put cancer cells into water that has half as much deuterium as you normally would have, they actually stop multiplying and they commit self-death. They just commit apoptosis, because the deuterium is too low. And if you give them high deuterium, they thrive and they start increasing their multiplication rate. So they like deuterium. Deuterium triggers them to grow, and lack of deuterium triggers them to close shop, which I find really, really interesting, because the normal cells do the opposite. So they have a different perception of how to react to deuterium, opposite perception of how to react to deuterium, which makes me think that the cancer cell, first of all, I think cells can sense how much deuterium there is in the environment, and then they can make a decision on how to act based on that. And a cancer cell knows to act by getting aggressive and growing faster, because it's got a job to do, which is to fix that deuterium problem. The other thing that's interesting is that immune cells swarm to the cancer microenvironment, they come in, they the big party, right? They swarm there, but then they don't act. Like there's mechanisms that cause them to stand down. So there's all these immune cells hanging out in the cancer environment, basically wasting time, like not doing anything. Like, why don't you kill the cancer? You're there. Why don't you just? And they get turned. They get those mechanisms are turned off, and the cancer cell actually emits, releases signals that cause the immune cells to stand down. On the other hand, the cancer cell is providing them with a lot of good stuff. They're getting the lactate, they're getting the low deuterium protons, and there's other things too that the cancer cell releases that are useful to the immune cells to help them regain health. So I think, in a way, the immune cells are coming to the cancer environment in order to partake of the wealth that the cancer is providing. and then eventually, if they can get enough of that good nutrition, they can fix their problems, and then they can attack the cancer once they've been repaired. But the first step is to go into the cancer cell environment and get repaired. So in a way, that's the cancer cell can really focus on improving the immune system, because the immune cells can come to its door and help themselves to all these nutrients, whereas the heart and the brain have to wait for it to make it through the circulation, so they don't get first dibs. The immune cells get a chance to partake of the riches and hopefully fix their mitochondria as a consequence of it. And then once they have healthy mitochondria, and also lysosomes, because the lysosomes get in trouble too when there's not too much deuterium. Once they fix that machinery, then they can go ahead and attack the cancer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting too. And then, of course, we give people chemo and it kills your immune cells. So
yeah, I know. That's right.
Yeah.
That's the wrong thing to do, because you need to get the immune cells to be healthier. But some of his book, I read his second book. It's quite dry. It has all these cases, but it's really striking how well these people do, because he has, people who were basically rejected by the mainstream because they're like, just go home and die. We don't have anything else to do for you. And then they'll start drinking this deuterium depleted water, and they'll live way beyond their life expectancy that the mainstream was predicting, given their circumstance, and sometimes even completely recover. Yeah. So that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, very much so. And I think there's a lot of interplay there between, we were talking about before we started with Professor Thomas Seyfried's work on ketogenic metabolic therapy.
Absolutely.
And its treatment in cancer, because you're affecting the Warburg effect, where these cancer cells require 400 times the amount of glucose as normal cells. But then there's also this relationship with deuterium, and when you're in a ketogenic state, you will naturally lower your overall deuterium levels, and whether it's just that the cancer cells can't survive without the deuterium, or the cancer is trying to serve a role in protecting against deuterium, and now their job is done.
That's the way I like to think of it. They're closing shop because they're not needed anymore. Once the deuterium level goes down, they're like, okay, good, job done, I'm out of here. Their whole purpose is to serve the host, to try to fix the problem. They don't need to fix it if it's already fixed. So I love that idea.
Yeah, well, I like it too, and it's it definitely shows that interplay between and we are seeing people with going on ketogenic metabolic therapy, and that's going to restrict the glucose, but it's also restricting the deuterium, and I think that they are both working to the same effect.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. So are there other sort of major illnesses and roles that deuterium would play and disrupt in our body apart from cancer as well, if you get this out of balance?
Well, there's another very interesting aspect that I'm deep into right now, and I'm really, really fascinated with. I've been playing around with the idea, this is another really radical idea, that Alzheimer's disease and all the misfolding, protein misfolding diseases are connected to deuterium. And I think, it's interesting because the cancer cells and the neurons are very, very different. In fact, cancer cells will thrive under circumstances where neurons will die. They're complete opposite in their effect on the environment. But the neurons, so I discovered that there are certain special molecules that have carbon atoms that are able to sequester deuterium and hold onto it for dear life. It's really interesting. There's a set of molecules. I'm gathering a list as we speak, that have a special property that they're able to trap and hold deuterium. So it turns out that this is a bit of chemistry, but it's so fascinating. Nitrogen, sulfur, and oxygen they all will readily take up deuterium from the water. So you've got these deuterons and protons that are floating around in the water, and then the oxygen is holding onto a hydrogen atom, and it'll just, oh yeah, you can go, I'll take this one, and then keep on switching off, right, from the water. It doesn't hold on to its hydrogen atom well enough to keep it there. So it just lets it go very easily, and then a new one comes in, and that one could be a deuterium atom. So it's very easy for deuterium to get onto those three, nitrogen, oxygen, and sulfur. Carbon, on the other hand, most of the carbon atoms will never let go of their hydrogen unless there's a special enzyme that can yank it off. So that it'll sit there forever. You can put the carbon atom in, D2O, like pure deuterium oxide, and let it sit there, and it won't pick up the deuterium. It'll still have hydrogen at that place. It just won't do it. But there's a few exceptions, and that's what's really, really interesting. And one of those exceptions is a molecule called histidine, which is an amino acid. And histidine is a very interesting amino acid with very interesting physical properties that make it have special effects in proteins. And so histidine has what's called an imidazole ring. It's a ring with a couple of nitrogens in it and some carbons. It's like a circle, right, of atoms stuck together in a circle. And there's a carbon that sits between two nitrogens. And that carbon is actually able to pick up deuterium. So you can take a molecule that has all these different. If it has one of these rings, and you put it into D2O, then that hydrogen will become populated with deuterium. That carbon that's sitting between those two nitrogens can switch off its hydrogen and get a deuterium. And if it does that, it won't let go. It's different from the other ones, because the other ones are letting go all the time, but it actually traps it. So then when you put the molecule back into H2O, all the deuteriums go away from all the oxygens and nitrogens and sulfurs, but that deuterium that's on that carbon atom stays there. It doesn't go away. So they've discovered this just in looking at chemistry. Very interesting property of this carbon in this imidazole ring. And so to me, that immediately makes me think that it could trap deuterium in a protein and keep it there. So it's a way to pull deuterium landmines out of the water.